whether the evidence shows that Proposition 8 enacted a private moral view without advancing a legitimate government interest. Under Proposition 8, whether a couple can obtain a marriage license and enter into marriage depends on the genders of the two parties relative to one another. A man is permitted to marry a woman, but not another man. A woman is to marry a man, but not another woman. Proposition 8 bars state and county officials from issuing marriage licenses to same-sex couples. It has no other legal effect. California Constitution 1, Section 7.5, which is the codification of Proposition 8. California Voter Information Guide, California General Election, November 4, 2008. Proposition 8, quote, eliminates right of same-sex couples to marry, unquote. Proposition 8 places the force of law behind stigmas against gays and lesbians, including gays and lesbians do not have intimate relationships similar to heterosexual couples. Gays and lesbians are not as good as heterosexuals, and gay and lesbian relationships do not deserve the full recognition of society. Peploe, being prevented by the government from being married is no different than other kinds of stigma and discrimination that have been studied in terms of their impact on relationships, unquote. Chauncey, the campaign for Proposition 8 presented marriage for same-sex couples as an adult issue, although children are frequently exposed to romantic fairy tales or weddings featuring opposite-sex couples. Meyer, quote, Proposition 8, in its social meaning, sends a message that gay relationships are not to be respected, that they are of secondary value, if of any value at all, and that they are certainly not equal to those of heterosexuals. Herrick, in 2004, California enacted legislation that increased the benefits and responsibilities associated with domestic partnership, which became effective in 2005. In the second half of 2004, the California Secretary of State mailed a letter to all registered domestic partners advising them of the changes and telling recipients to consider whether to dissolve their partnership. Herrick, quote, finds it difficult to imagine that if there were changes in tax laws that were going to affect married couples, that you would have the state government sending letters to persons suggesting that they consider whether or not they want to get divorced before this new law goes into effect. I think that letter just illustrates the way in which domestic partnerships are viewed differently than marriage, unquote. Letter from Kevin Shelley, California Secretary of State to registered domestic partners. Shelley explains domestic partnership law will change on January 1, 2005 and suggests that domestic partners dissolve their partnership if they do not wish to be bound by the new structure of domestic partnership. Meyer, quote, laws are perhaps the strongest of social structures that uphold and enforce stigma, unquote. Herrick, structural stigma provides a context and identifies which members of society are devalued. It also gives a level of permission to denigrate or attack particular groups or those who are perceived to be members of certain groups in society. Herrick, Proposition 8 is an instance of structural stigma. Proposition 8 requires California to treat same-sex couples differently from opposite-sex couples. Attorney General admits that because two types of relationships, one for same-sex couples and one for opposite-sex couples, exist in California, a gay or lesbian individual may be forced to disclose his or her sexual orientation when responding to a question about his or her marital status. California Family Code Section 300 to 536, California Family Code Section 297 to 299.6 refer to marriage and registered domestic partnerships. Proposition 8 reserves the most socially valued form of relationship, marriage, for opposite-sex couples. Peploe. In a study by Gary Gates, Lee Badgett, and Deborah Ho suggests that same-sex couples are 3 times more likely to get married than enter into domestic partnerships or civil unions. Lee Badgett, in an article entitled When Gay People Get Married, states many Dutch couples saw marriage as better because it had an additional social meaning that registered partnerships as a recent political invention lacked. In some places, the cultural and political trappings of statutes that are not marriage sends a very clear message of difference and inferiority to gay and lesbian couples. When compared to marriage, domestic partnership may become a mark of second-class citizenship and less understood socially. In practice, these legal alternatives to marriage are limited because they do not map into a well-developed social institution that gives the act of marriage its social and cultural meaning. Herrick. The difference between domestic partnerships and marriage is more than simply a word. If we look at public opinion data, for example, there is a sizable proportion of the public, both in California and the United States, who say they're willing to let same-sex couples have domestic partnerships or civil unions, but not marriage. This suggests a distinction in the minds of a large number of Americans. It's not simply a word. In addition, looking at the recent history of California, when it became possible for same-sex couples to marry, thousands of them did. And many of those were domestic partners. So clearly, they thought there was something different about being married. Speaker warns that if Proposition 8 does not pass, children will be taught that gay marriage is not just a different type of marriage, that they're going to be taught that it's a good thing. And Speaker refers to the Voice and the satellite simulcast in defense of marriage. Proposition 8 amends the California Constitution to codify distinct and unique roles for men and women in marriage. Lamb. The traditional family refers to a family with a married mother and father who are both biologically related to their children, where the mother stays at home and the father is the breadwinner. Protect Marriage, the Fine Line transcript, October 2008, states, children need a loving family, and yes, they need a mother and father. Now, going on what Sean was saying here about the consequences of this, if Proposition 8 doesn't pass, then it will be illegal to distinguish between heterosexual and same-sex couples when it comes to adoption. Yvette just mentioned some statistics about growing up in families with a mother and father at home. More important, or how important it is to have that kind of thing, I'm not a sociologist. I'm not a psychologist. I'm just a human being, but you don't need to be wearing a white coat to know that kids need a mom and dad. I'm a dad, and I know that I provide something different than my wife does in my family, and my wife provides something entirely different than I do in our family, and both are vital. Another excerpt from Protect Marriage, the Fine Line transcript. When moms are in the park taking care of their kids, they always know where those kids are. They have like a radar around them. They know where those kids are, and there's a bond between the mom and a kid different from a dad. I'm not saying dads don't have that bond, but they don't. It's just different. You know, middle of the night, mom will wake up, dad will just sleep. You know, if there's a little noise in the room, and when kids get scared, they run to mommy. Why? Well, they spent 9 months in mommy. They go back to where they came. Video. Ron Prentice addressing supporters of Proposition 8. Prentice tells people at a religious rally that marriage is not about love, but instead about women civilizing men. Again, because it's not about two people in love, it's about men becoming civilized. Frankly, I can tell you this from personal experience, and every man in this audience could do the same thing if they chosen to marry. Because when you do find the woman that you love, you are compelled to listen to her. And when the woman that I loved prior to my marrying her told me that my table manners were less than adequate, I became more civilized. And when she told me that my rust-colored corduroy were never again to be worn, I became more civilized. Protect marriage, a fine line transcript. Skin color is morally trivial, as you pointed out, but sex is fundamental to everything. There is no difference between a white or a black human being, and there's no big difference between a man and a woman. Transcript, ABC, Protecting Marriage. Jennifer Roback Morse states that the function of marriage is to attract mothers and fathers to one another, and mothers and fathers to their children, especially fathers to children. A video supporting Proposition 8, Prentice states, children need the chance to have both mother love and father love, and that moms and dads and males and females complement each other. They don't bring to a marriage and to a family the same natural set of skills and talents and abilities. They bring to children the blessing of both masculinity and femininity. Email from Kenyon Curitan, Vice President Family Research Council, to Prentice, August 2008. Attached to the email is a kit to be distributed to Christian voters through churches to help them promote Proposition 8, which states, thank God for the difference between man and woman. In fact, the two genders were meant to complement each other physically, emotionally, and every other way. Also, both genders are needed for a healthy home. As Dr. James Dobson notes, more than 10,000 studies have concluded that kids do best when they're raised by mothers and fathers. Transcript, Love, Power, and Mine, a telecast, September 25, 2008, CCN. Same-sex marriage, it will unravel that in a significant way and say that really male and female, mother and father, husband and wife are just really optional for the family, not necessary, and that is a radically anti-human thing to say. Transcript, ABC, Protecting Marriage. And we know that fatherlessness has caused significant problems for a whole generation of children, and same-sex marriage would send us more in that direction of intentionally fatherless homes. Protect Marriage, a fine line transcript. Miles McPherson states that it is a truth that God created the woman bride as the groom's compatible marriage companion. Proposition 8 does not affect the First Amendment rights of those opposed to marriage for same-sex couples. Prior to Proposition 8, no religious group was required to recognize marriage for same-sex couples. In re marriage cases. Affording same-sex couples the opportunity to obtain the designation of marriage will not impinge upon religious freedom of any religious organization or official or other person. No religion will be required to change its religious policies or practices with regard to same-sex couples, and no religious officiant will be required to solemnize a marriage in contravention of his or her religious beliefs. Civil law, not religious custom, is supreme, defining and regulating marriage in the United States. California Family Code 400-420. Proposition 8 eliminates the right to marry for gays and lesbians, but does not affect any other substantive right under the California Constitution. Proposition 8 does not eliminate the substantial substantive constitutional protections afforded to same-sex couples. Proposition 8 has a negative fiscal impact on California and local governments. Budget. Proposition 8 has had a negative fiscal impact on California and local governments. Budget. Quote, Proposition 8 has imposed some economic losses on the state of California and on counties and municipalities, unquote. Badgett, denying same-sex couples the right to marry imposes costs on local governments such as loss of tax revenue, higher usage of means-tested programs, higher costs for health care of uninsured same-sex partners, and loss of skilled workers. Egan, quote, "What we're really talking about in the non-quantifiable impacts are the long-term advantages of marriage as an institution and the long-term costs of discrimination as a way that weakens people's productivity and integration into the labor force. Whether it's weakening their education because they're discriminated against at school or lending them excessive reliance on behavioral or other health services, these are impacts that are hard to quantify, but they can wind up being extremely powerful. How much healthier you are over your lifetime, how much wealth you generate because you are in a partnership," unquote. Badgett, denying same-sex couples the right to marry tends to reduce same-sex couples' incomes, which, quote, "will make them more likely to need and be eligible for means-tested programs that are paid for by the state," unquote. Similarly, to the extent that same-sex couples cannot obtain health insurance for their partners and children, there will be more people who might need to sign up for the state's sponsored health programs. CCSF would benefit economically if Proposition 8 were not in effect. CCF would benefit immediately from increased wedding revenue and associated expenditures and an increased number of county residents with health insurance. CCF would benefit economically from decreased discrimination against gays and lesbians, resulting in decreased absenteeism at work and in schools, lower mental health costs, and greater wealth accumulation. CCNF enacted the Equal Benefits Ordinance to mandate that city contractors and vendors provide same-sex partners employees with benefits equal to those provided to opposite-sex spouses of employees. CCF bears the cost of enforcing the ordinance. The city and county of San Francisco would benefit economically if Proposition 8 were not in effect. CCSF would benefit immediately from increased wedding revenue and associated expenditures and an increased number of county residents with health insurance. CCSF would benefit economically from decreased discrimination against gays and lesbians, resulting in decreased absenteeism at work and in schools, lower mental health costs, and greater wealth accumulation. CCSF enacted the Equal Benefits Ordinance to mandate that city contractors and vendors provide same-sex partners of employees with benefits equal to those provided to opposite-sex spouses of employees. CCSF bears the cost of enforcing the ordinance and defending it against legal challenges. Proposition 8 increases costs and decreases wealth for same-sex couples because of increased tax burdens, decreased availability of health insurance, and higher transactions costs to secure rights and obligations typically associated with marriage. Domestic partnership reduces but does not eliminate those costs. Proposition 8 has, quote, inflicted substantial economic harm on same-sex couples and their children who live in California, close quote, by Badgett. Badgett, marriage confers economic benefits including greater specialization of labor, reduced transaction costs, health and insurance benefits, and more positive workplace outcomes. Badgett, couples that would marry but not enter into domestic partnerships suffer tangible economic harm such as higher taxes and limited access to health insurance. Badgett in the article Unequal Taxes on Equal Benefits, the Taxation of Domestic Partner Benefits, quote, workers who have an unmarried domestic partner are doubly burdened. Their employers typically do not provide coverage for domestic partners, and even when partners are covered, the partner's coverage is taxed as income to the employees. Langbein and Yost, article Same-Sex Marriage and Negative Externalities, 2009. For example, this is the quote, "The ban on gay marriage induces failures in insurance and financial markets. Because spousal benefits do not transfer in most cases to domestic partners, there are large portions of the population that should be insured but instead receive inequitable treatment and are not insured properly. This is equally true in the treatment of estates on the death of individuals. In married relations, it is clear to whom an estate reverts, but in the case of homosexual couples, there is no clear right of ownership, resulting in higher transactions costs widely regarded as socially inefficient." Unquote. Report of the Council on Science and Public Health, Healthcare Disparities in Same-Sex Households, Alvin Head as presenter. Quote, "Survey data confirm that same-sex households have less access to health insurance. If they have health insurance, they pay more than married heterosexual workers and also lack other financial protections. Children in same-sex households lack the same protections afforded children in heterosexual households." Close quote. The American Medical Association policy, Healthcare Disparities in Same-Sex Partner Households, quote, "Exclusion from civil marriage contributes to health care disparities affecting same-sex households." Unquote. California Employer Health Benefits Survey by the California Healthcare Foundation, 2008. Only 56% of California firms offered health insurance to unmarried same-sex couples in 2008. National Center for Lesbian Rights and Equality California article entitled "The California Domestic Partnership Law, What It Means for You and Your Family," 2009. Domestic partnerships create more transaction costs than exist in marriage, quote, "despite automatic legal protection for children born to registered domestic partners. The National Center for Lesbian Rights is strongly recommending that all couples obtain a court judgment declaring both partners to be their child's legal parents, either an adoption or a parentage judgment." Close quote. Michael Steinberger, Federal Estate Tax Disadvantages for Same-Sex Couples, published 2009. Quote, "Using data from several government data sources, this report estimates the dollar value of the estate tax disadvantage faced by some same-sex couples. In 2009, the differential treatment of same-sex and married couples in the estate tax code will affect an estimated 73 same-sex couples, costing each of them on average more than $3.3 million. Close quote. Proposition 8 singles out gays and lesbians and legitimates their unequal treatment. Proposition 8 perpetuates the stereotype that gays and lesbians are incapable of forming long-term loving relationships and that gays and lesbians are not good parents. Herrick, in, quote, "a definitional sense," unquote, Proposition 8 is an instance of structural stigma against gays and lesbians. Meyer, domestic partnership does not eliminate the structural stigma of Proposition 8 because it does not provide the symbolic or social meaning of marriage. Meyer, one of the stereotypes that is part of the stigma surrounding gay men and lesbians is that gay men and lesbians are incapable of, uninterested in, and not successful at having intimate relationships. Chauncey, the fear of homosexuals as child molesters and as recruiters continues to play a role in debates over gay rights, and with particular attention to gay teachers, parents, and married couples, people who might have close contact with children. California Voter Information Guide, California General Election, Tuesday, November 4, 2008. Teachers could be required to teach young children that there is no difference between gay marriage and traditional marriage. Meyer, Proposition 8, quote, sends a message that gay relationships are not to be respected, that they are of secondary value, if of any value at all, that they are certainly not equal to those of heterosexuals. So, in addition to achieving the literal aims of not allowing gay people to marry, it also sends a strong message about the values of the state, in this case, the Constitution itself. And it sends a message that would, in Meyer's mind, encourage, or at least is consistent with, holding prejudicial attitudes. So that doesn't add up to a very welcoming environment, close quote. Proposition 8 results in frequent reminders for gays and lesbians in committed long-term relationships that their relationships are not as highly valued as opposite-sex relationships. Meyer, when gay men and lesbians have to explain why they are not married, they, quote, have to explain, I'm really not seen as an equal. My status is not respected by my state or by my country, by my fellow citizens, close quote. Badgett's interviews with same-sex couples indicate that couples value the social recognition of marriage and believe that the alternative status conveys a message of inferiority. Perry, a passenger on a plane once assumed that she could take the seat that Perry had been saving for Steyer because Perry referred to Steyer as her, quote, partner, unquote. Steyer, it has been difficult to explain to others her relationship with Perry because they are not married. Steyer, it is challenging to fill out forms in a doctor's office that ask whether she is single, married, or divorced because, quote, I have to find myself, scratching something out, putting a line through it, or saying, quote, domestic partner, unquote, and making sure I explain to folks what that is to make sure that our transaction can go smoothly, unquote. Meyer, for lesbians and gay men, filling out a form requiring them to designate their marital status can be significant because the form filler has no box to check. While correcting a form is a minor event, it is significant for the gay or lesbian person because the form evokes something much larger for the person, a social disapproval and rejection. Quote, it's about, I'm gay and I'm not accepted here. Close quote. The factors that affect whether a child is well-adjusted are 1. The quality of the child's relationship with his or her parents. 2. The quality of the relationship between a child's parents or significant adults in the child's life. And 3. Availability of economic and social resources. The gender of a child's parent is not a factor in a child's adjustment. The sexual orientation of an individual does not determine whether that individual can be a good parent. Children raised by gay or lesbian parents are as likely as children raised by heterosexual parents to be healthy, successful, and well-adjusted. The research supporting this conclusion is accepted beyond serious debate in the field of developmental psychology. Lamb, studies have demonstrated, quote, very conclusively that children who are raised by gay and lesbian parents are just as likely to be well-adjusted as children raised by heterosexual parents, close quote. These results are, quote, completely consistent with our broader understanding of the factors that affect children's adjustment, unquote. American Psychological Association answers to your questions for a better understanding of sexual orientation and homosexuality, published 2008. Quote, social science has shown that concerns often raised about children of lesbian and gay parents, concerns that are generally grounded in prejudice against and stereotypes about gay people are unfounded. Close quote. Nathanson. Sociological and psychological peer-reviewed studies conclude that permitting gay and lesbian individuals to marry does not cause any problems for children. Children do not need to be raised by a male parent and a female parent to be well-adjusted, and having both a male and a female parent does not increase the likelihood that a child will be well-adjusted. The genetic relationship between a parent and a child is not related to a child's adjustment outcomes. Lamb. Studies comparing outcomes for children raised by married opposite-sex parents to children raised by single or divorced parents do not inform conclusions about outcomes for children raised by same-sex parents in a stable, long-term relationship. Gays and lesbians have been victims of a long history of discrimination. Proponents' counsel. We have never disputed, and we have offered to stipulate that gays and lesbians have been the victims of a long and shameful history of discrimination. Chauncey. Gays and lesbians, quote, have experienced widespread and acute discrimination from both public and private authorities over the course of the 20th century, and that has continuing legacies and effects. Chauncey, discussing details of discrimination against gays and lesbians. Letter from John W. Macy, Chairman, Civil Service Commission, to the Mattachine Society of Washington, February 25, 1966. The Commission rejected the Mattachine Society request to rescind the policy banning active homosexuals from federal employment. Pertinent considerations are the revulsion of other employees by homosexual conduct and the consequent disruption of service efficiency, the apprehension caused other employees of homosexual advances, solicitation, or assaults, the unavoidable subjection of the sexual deviant to erotic stimulation through the on-job use of the common toilet, shower, and living facilities, the offense to members of the public who are required to deal with a known or admitted sexual deviant to transact government business, the hazard that the prestige and authority of a government position will be used to foster homosexual activity, particularly among the youth, and the use of government funds and authority in furtherance of conduct offensive both to the mores and the law of our society. Close quote. Letter from E.D. Coleman, Exempt Organizations Branch, IRS, to the Pride Foundation, 1974. The Pride Foundation is not entitled to an exemption under Internal Revenue Code Section 501c3 because the organization's goal, quote, of advancing the welfare of the homosexual community, unquote, was, quote, perverted or deviant behavior contrary to public policy and is therefore not charitable, close quote. Public and private discrimination against gays and lesbians occurs in California and in the United States. Proponents submit that gays and lesbians continue to experience instances of discrimination. The Attorney General admits 263 hate crime events based on sexual orientation bias occurred in California in 2004, 255 occurred in 2005, 246 occurred in 2006, 263 occurred in 2007, and 283 occurred in 2008. California Department of Justice article entitled Hate Crime in California, 2004 to 2005. From 2004 to 2008. From 2004 to 2008, between 17 and 20% of all hate crime offenses in California were motivated by sexual orientation bias. California Department of Justice article, Hate Crime in California, 2004 to 2008. From 2004 to 2008, between 246 and 283 hate crime events motivated by sexual orientation bias occurred each year in California. Chauncey, there is still significant discrimination against lesbians and gay men in the United States. Segura, quote, over the last 5 years, there has actually been an increase in violence directed towards gay men and lesbians. Quote, gays and lesbians are representing a larger and larger portion of the number of acts of violence, acts of bias-motivated violence, close quote, and, quote, are far more likely to experience violence, close quote. Quote, 73% of all the hate crimes committed against gays and lesbians also include an act of violence, close quote. Quote, we are talking about the most extreme form of hate-based violence, close quote. The hate crimes accounted for, quote, 71% of all hate-motivated murders, close quote, and, quote, 55% of all hate-motivated rapes, close quote, in 2008. Quote, there is simply no other person in society who endures the likelihood of being harmed as a consequence of their identity than a gay man or lesbian, close quote. The Williams Institute, an article documenting discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, and state employment, September 2009, quote, there is a widespread and persistent pattern of unconstitutional discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity against California government employees, close quote, and the pattern of discrimination is similar for private sector employees in California. The Williams Institute article entitled Other Indicia of Animus Against LGBT People by State and Local Officials 1980 to Present, published 2009. Statements made by legislators, judges, governors, and other officials in all 50 states show hostility toward gays and lesbians, including a 1999 statement by California State Senator Richard Mountjoy that, quote, being gay is a sickness, an uncontrolled passion similar to that which would cause someone to rape, close quote. Miller agrees that, quote, there has been severe prejudice and discrimination against gays and lesbians, close quote, and, quote, widespread and persistent, close quote, discrimination against gays and lesbians, and that, quote, there is ongoing discrimination in the United States, close quote, against gays and lesbians. Miller, gays and lesbians are still, quote, object of prejudice and stereotype, close quote. Miller agrees that, quote, there are some gays and lesbians who are fired from their jobs, refused work, paid less, and otherwise discriminated against in the workplace because of their sexual orientation, close quote. Well-known stereotypes about gay men and lesbians include a belief that gays and lesbians are affluent, self-absorbed, and incapable of forming long-term intimate relationships. Other stereotypes imagine gay men and lesbians as disease vectors or as child molesters who recruit young children into homosexuality. No evidence supports these stereotypes. In the book, Poverty in the Lesbian, Gay, and Bisexual Community, March 2009 article, Williams Institute, written by Randy Albelda, he writes, a popular stereotype paints lesbians and gay men as an affluent elite. The misleading myth of affluence steers policymakers, community organizations, service providers, and the media away from fully understanding poverty among LGBT people. Chauncey writes, medical pronouncements that were hostile to gays and lesbians provided a powerful source of legitimization to anti-homosexual sentiment and were themselves a manifestation of discrimination against gays and lesbians. Meyer writes, one of the stereotypes that is part of the stigma surrounding gay men and lesbians is that gay men and lesbians are incapable of, uninterested in, and not successful at having intimate relationships. Gay men and lesbians have been described as social isolates, as unconnected to society, and people who do not participate in society the way everybody else does, as a pariah, so to speak. David Rubin writes, in Everything You Wanted to Know About Sex But Were Afraid to Ask, what about all the homosexuals who lived together happily for years? What about them? They are mighty rare birds among the homosexual flock. Moreover, this happy part remains to be seen. The bitterest argument between husband and wife is a passionate love sonnet by comparison with a dialogue between a butch and his queen. Live together, yes, happily, hardly. Chauncey states, even though not all sodomy laws solely penalize homosexual conduct, over the course of the 20th century, sodomy laws came to symbolize the criminalization of homosexual sex in particular. This was most striking in Bowers v. Hardwick, which reads as though the law at issue simply bears on homosexual sex, when in fact the Georgia law at issue criminalized both homosexual and heterosexual sodomy. Chauncey writes, the federal government was slow to respond to the AIDS crisis, and this was in part because of the association of AIDS with a despised group. Peploe writes, there is no empirical support for the negative stereotypes that gay men and lesbians have trouble forming stable relationships, or that those relationships are inferior to heterosexual relationships. It is stated in the 81st Congress article on employment of homosexuals and other sex perverts in Congress, second section, 1950. Most of the authorities agree, and our investigation has shown, that the presence of a sex pervert in a government agency tends to have a corrosive influence on his fellow employees. These perverts will frequently attempt to entice normal individuals to engage in perverted practices. This is particularly true in the case of young and impressionable people who might come under the influence of a pervert. Government officials have the responsibility of keeping this type of corrosive influence out of the agencies under their control. It is particularly important that the thousands of young women and men who are brought into federal jobs not be subjected to that type of influence while in the service of the government. One homosexual can pollute a government office. Chauncey. Like most outsider groups, there have been stereotypes associated with gay people, indeed a range of groups, including medical professionals, religious groups, and have worked in a coordinated way to develop stereotypical images of gay people. Chauncey writes, in some ways, the most dangerous stereotypes for homosexuals really developed between the 1930s and 50s, when there was a series of press and police campaigns that identified homosexuals as child molesters. These press campaigns against assaults on children focus on sex perverts or sex deviants, though these campaigns, and through these campaigns, the homosexual emerged as a sex deviant. George Chauncey writes, once a man assumes the role of homosexual, he often throws off all moral restraints. Some male sex deviants do not stop with infecting their often innocent partners. They descended through perversions to other forms of depravity, such as drug addiction, burglary, sadism, and even murder. I should point out that George Chauncey wrote the book in which this contains excerpts from statements that were found in Coronet magazine. These are not George Chauncey's statements. Chauncey, this excerpt from Coronet magazine, depicts homosexuals as subjects of moral decay. In addition, there's a sense of homosexuality as a disease in which the carrier infects other people, and the term innocent pretty clearly indicates that the authors are talking about children. Chauncey, writing in the post-war sex crime panic article, contains a statement made by a Special Assistant Attorney General of California in 1949. The sex pervert, in his more innocuous form, is too frequently regarded as merely a queer individual who never hurts anyone but himself. All too often we lose sight of the fact that the homosexual is an inveterate seducer of the young of both sexes and is ever seeking for younger victims. Chauncey again writes and points out in an article that the articles were concerned and mostly addressed to adults who understandably were concerned about the safety of their children, who were being taught to believe that homosexuals posed a threat to their children. Chauncey, one of the most enduring legacies of the emergence of these stereotypes is the creation and then the reinforcement of a series of demonic images of homosexuals that stay with us today. This fear of homosexuals as child molesters or as recruiters continues to play a role in debates over gay rights, and with particular attention to gay teachers, parents, and married people who might have close contact with children. Lamb writes, social science studies have disproven the hypothesis that gays and lesbians are more likely to abuse children. Religious beliefs that gay and lesbian relationships are sinful or inferior to heterosexual relationships harm gays and lesbians. Religions, it's published by Nathanson, November 12, 2009. Religions teach that homosexual relations are a sin, and that contributes to. Religious beliefs that gay and lesbian relationships are sinful or inferior to heterosexual relationships harm gays and lesbians. Nathanson. Religions teach that homosexual relations are a sin and that contributes to gay bashing. Young. There is a religious component to bigotry and prejudice against gay and lesbian individuals. Segura. Quote, religion is the chief obstacle for gay and lesbian political progress, and it's the chief obstacle for a couple of reasons. It's difficult to think of a more powerful social entity in American society than the church. It's a very powerful organization, and in large measure they are arrayed against the interest of gays and lesbians. Biblical condemnation of homosexuality and the teaching that gays are morally inferior on a regular basis to a huge percentage of the public makes the political opportunity structure very hostile to gay interests. It is very difficult to overcome that, close quote. Ron Prentice addressing supporters of Proposition 8 in a video. Prentice explains that, quote, God has led the way, close quote, for the Protect Marriage campaign. And Prentice explains that, quote, we do mind, close quote, when same-sex couples want to take the name, quote, marriage, unquote, and apply it to their relationships because, quote, that's not what God wanted. It's real basic. It starts with Genesis 2, close quote. Chauncey, many clergy in churches considered homosexuality a sin, preached against it, and have led campaigns against gay rights. Chauncey, the religious arguments that were mobilized in the 1950s to argue against interracial marriage and integration as against God's will are mirrored by arguments that have been mobilized in the Proposition 8 campaign and many of the campaigns since Anita Bryant's, quote, Save Our Children, unquote, campaign, which argue that homosexuality itself, or gay people, or the recognition of their equality is against God's will. Proposition 8, local exit polls, Election Center, 2008, CNN, 84% of people who attended church weekly voted in favor of Proposition 8. Leaflet, James L. Garlow, The 10 Declarations for Protecting Biblical Marriage, June 25, 2008. Quote, the Bible defines marriage as a covenantal union of one male and one female. We will avoid unproductive arguments with those who, through the use of casuistry and rationalization, revise biblical passages in order to condone the practice of homosexuality or other sexual sins, close quote. Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, considerations regarding proposals to give legal recognition to unions between homosexual persons. Quote, sacred scripture condemns homosexual acts as a serious depravity. Catholics for the Common Good, considerations regarding proposals to give legal recognition to unions between homosexual persons. Excerpts from Vatican document on legal recognition of homosexual unions, November 2009. There are absolutely no grounds for considering homosexual unions to be, quote, in any way similar or even remotely analogous to God's plan for marriage and family, close quote. Quote, homosexual acts go against the natural order and law, close quote, and, quote, under no circumstances can be approved, close quote. Quote, the homosexual inclination is objectively disordered and homosexual practices are sins gravely contrary to chastity, close quote. Quote, allowing children to be adopted by persons living in such unions would actually mean doing violence to these children, close quote. And, quote, legal recognition of homosexual unions would mean its approval of deviant behavior, close quote. Southern Baptist Convention, SBC, resolution on same-sex marriage, June 2003. Legalizing same-sex marriage would convey a societal approval of a homosexual lifestyle, which the Bible calls sinful and dangerous both to the individuals involved and to society at large. Southern Baptist Convention, resolution on President Clinton's Gay and Lesbian Pride Month proclamation, June 1999. The Bible clearly teaches that homosexual behavior is an abomination and shameful before God. Evangelical Presbyterian Church position paper on homosexuality. Quote, homosexual practice is a distortion of the image of God as it is still reflected in fallen man, and a perversion of the sexual relationship as God intended it to be, close quote. The Christian life, Christian conduct as regards the institutions of God, the Free Methodist Church. Quote, homosexual behavior, as all sexual deviation, is a perversion of God's created order, close quote. Aylberry, what about homosexuality? The Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod, Quote, "The Lord teaches us through his word that homosexuality is a sinful distortion of his desire that one man and one woman live together in marriage as husband and wife." Close quote. On marriage, family, sexuality, and the sanctity of life, Orthodox Church of America, quote, "Homosexuality is to be approached as a result of humanity's rebellion against God." Close quote. Segura, quote, "Proponents expert Dr. Young freely admits that religious hostility to homosexuals plays an important role in creating a social climate that's conducive to hateful acts, to opposition to their interest in the public sphere, and to prejudice and discrimination." Close quote. Miller agrees with his former statement that, quote, "the religious characteristics of California's Democratic voters explain why so many Democrats voted for Barack Obama and also for Proposition 8. Stereotypes and misinformation have resulted in social and legal disadvantages for gays and lesbians. Chauncey, the quote, "Save Our Children," close quote, campaign in Dade County, Florida in 1977 was led by Anita Bryant, a famous Baptist singer. It sought to overturn an enactment that added sexual orientation to an anti-discrimination law, and it drew on and revived earlier stereotypes of homosexuals as child molesters. Segura, ballot initiatives banning marriage equality have been passed in 33 states. Miller, quote, "My view is that at least some people voted for Proposition 8 on the basis of anti-gay stereotypes and prejudice," close quote. Chauncey is less optimistic now that same-sex marriage will become common in the United States than he was in 2004. Since 2004, when Chauncey wrote "Why Marriage? The History Shaping Today's Debate Over Gay Equality," the majority of states have enacted legislation or constitutional amendments that would prohibit same-sex couples from marrying. Some have been enacted by legislative vote, but a tremendous number of popular referenda have enacted these discriminatory measures. Chauncey, quote, "The wave of campaigns that we've seen against gay marriage rights in the last decade are, in effect, the latest stage and cycle of anti-gay rights campaigns of a sort that I have been describing, that they continue with a similar intent and use some of the same imagery." Chauncey, "The series of initiatives we have seen since the mid to late 1970s over gay rights are another example of continuing prejudice and hostility." Chauncey, "The term, quote, the gay agenda," unquote, was mobilized particularly effectively in the late 1980s and early 1990s in support of initiatives designed to overturn gay rights laws. The term tries to construct the idea of a unitary agenda, and that picks up on long-standing stereotypes. Segura, quote, "The role of prejudice is profound. If the group is envisioned as somehow morally inferior, a threat to children, a threat to freedom, if there's these deep-seated beliefs, then the range of compromise is dramatically limited. It's very difficult to engage in the give and take of the legislative process when I think that you are an inherently bad person. That's just not the basis for a compromise and negotiation in the political process." Close quote. Segura, quote, "The American public is not very fond of gays and lesbians," close quote. Warmness scores for gays and lesbians are as much as 16 to 20 points below the average score for religious, racial, and ethnic groups. Over 65% of respondents place gays and lesbians below the midpoint, below the score of 50, whereas a third to 45% did the same for other groups. When, quote, 2/3 of all respondents are giving gays and lesbians a score below 50, that's telling elected officials that they can say bad things about gays and lesbians, and that could be politically advantageous to them because many parts of the electorate feel the same way, close quote. Additionally, quote, the initiative process could be fertile ground to try to mobilize some of these voters to the polls for that cause, close quote. The Williams Institute, Chapter 14, Other Indicia of Animus Against LGBT People by State and Local Officials, 1980 to present, published 2009. The Williams Institute collected negative comments made by politicians about gays and lesbians in all 50 states. An Arizona state representative compared homosexuality to bestiality, human sacrifice, and cannibalism. A California state senator described homosexuality as a sickness, an uncontrolled passion similar to that which would cause someone to rape. Close quote. Kenneth P. Miller. Article, The Democratic Coalition's Religious Divide, Why California Voters Supported Obama but Not Same-Sex Marriage, published 2009. Quote, in the decade between 1998 and 2008, 30 states held statewide elections on state constitutional amendments defining marriage as a union between a man and a woman. Voters approved marriage amendments in all 30 states where they were able to vote on the question, usually by large margins. Close quote. The Proposition 8 campaign relied on fears that children exposed to the concept of same-sex marriage may become gay or lesbian. The reason children need to be protected from same-sex marriage was never articulated in official campaign advertisements. Nevertheless, the advertisements insinuated that learning about same-sex marriage could make a child gay or lesbian, and that parents should dread having a gay or lesbian child. Chauncey, Proposition 8 Official Reporter Guide, evoked fears about and contained stereotypical images of gay people. The Attorney General admits that some of the advertising in favor of Proposition 8 was based on fear of and prejudice against homosexual men and women. Miller, quote, my view is that at least some people voted for Proposition 8 on the basis of anti-gay stereotypes and prejudice, close quote. Schubert and Flint, Passing Proposition 8, Politics, February 2009, published, quote, passing Proposition 8 would depend upon our ability to convince voters that same-sex marriage had broader implications for Californians and was not only about the two individuals involved in a committed gay relationship, close quote. Quote, we strongly believe that a campaign in favor of traditional marriage would not be enough to prevail, close quote. Quote, we probed long and hard in countless focus groups and surveys to explore reactions to a variety of consequences our issue experts identified, close quote. And they decided to create campaign messaging focusing on, quote, how this new fundamental right would be inculcated in young children through public schools, close quote. Quote, there were limits to the degree of tolerance Californians would afford the gay community. They would entertain allowing gay marriage, but not if doing so had significant implications for the rest of society. Quote, the Prop 8 victory proves something that readers of Politics magazine know very well. Campaigns matter. Mailing leaflet, Protect Marriage. Quote, 4 activist judges on the Supreme Court in San Francisco ignored 4 million voters and imposed same-sex marriage on California. Their ruling means it is no longer about tolerance. acceptance of gay marriage is now mandatory. Video entitled Finally the Truth and Everything to Do with Schools, and Have You Thought About It? Protect marriage television ads threatening unarticulated consequences to children if Proposition 8 does not pass. Letter from Tam to quote friends, unquote. Quote, this November, San Francisco voters will vote on a ballot to, quote, legalize prostitution. This is put forth by San Francisco city government, which is under the rule of homosexuals. They lose no time in pushing the gay agenda. After legalizing same-sex marriage, they'll want to legalize prostitution. What will be next? On their agenda list is legalize having sex with children. We can't lose this critical battle. If we lose, this will very likely happen. 1. Same-sex marriage will be a permanent law in California. One by one, other states will fall into Satan's hand. 2. Every child, when growing up, would fantasize marrying someone of the same sex. More children would become homosexuals. Even if our children is safe, our grandchildren may not be. What about our children's grandchildren? 3. Gay activists would target the big churches and request be married by their pastors. If the church refuse, they would sue the church. Close quote. Chauncey, Tam's What If We Lose letter is consistent in its tone with a much longer history of anti-gay rhetoric. It reproduces many of the major themes of the anti-gay rights campaigns of previous decades and a longer history of anti-gay discrimination. Video, Massachusetts Parents Oppose Same-Sex Marriage by Rob and Robin Worthlin. Massachusetts parents warn that redefining marriage has an impact on every level of society, especially on children, and claim that in Massachusetts, homosexuality and gay marriage will soon be taught and promoted in every subject, including math, reading, social studies, and spelling. Chauncey, the Worthlin's advertisement implies a very exposure to the idea of homosexuality threatens children and threatens their sexual identity, and if homosexuality were a choice. In addition, it suggests the fact that gay people are being asked to be recognized and have their relationships recognized is an imposition on other people, as opposed to an extension of fundamental civil rights to gay and lesbian people. Ron Prentice addressing supporters of Proposition 8, quote, it's all about education and how it will be completely turned over, not just incrementally now, but whole hog to the other side. Segura, one of the enduring tropes of anti-gay augmentation has been that gays are a threat to children. In the Proposition 8 campaign, there was a campaign advertisement saying, at school today I was told that I could marry a princess too, and the underlying message of that is, if Prop 8 failed, the public schools are going to turn my daughter into a lesbian. Video entitled Finally the Truth, It's Already Happened. Massachusetts parents oppose same-sex marriage. Tony Perkins, Miles McPherson, and Ron Prentice asking for support of Proposition 8. Proposition 8 campaign videos focused on the need to protect children. Asian American Empowerment Council, Asian American Community Newsletter, and Voter Guide, October, November 2008. Children need to be protected from gays and lesbians. Tam supported Proposition 8 because he thinks, quote, it is very important that our children won't grow up to fantasize or think about, should I marry Jane or John when I grow up? Because this is very important for Asian families, the cultural issues, the stability of our family, close quote. Chauncey, Tam's deposition testimony displays a deep fear about the ideas that simple exposure to homosexuality or to marriages of gay and lesbian couples would lead children to become gay. And the issue is not just marriage equality itself, it is sympathy to homosexuality. They oppose the idea that children could be introduced in school to the idea that there are gay people in the world. It is also consistent with the idea that homosexuality is a choice, and there is an association between homosexuality and disease. Video supporting Proposition 8, Prentice states that, quote, if traditional marriage goes by the wayside, then in every public school, children will be indoctrinated with a message that is absolutely contrary to the values that their family is attempting to teach them at home, close quote. The campaign to pass Proposition 8 relied on stereotypes to show that same-sex relationships are inferior to opposite-sex relationships. Video entitled Finally the Truth, also entitled Have You Thought About It, and Whether You Like It or Not, and Everything to Do with Schools, and It's Already Happened, as well as photo leaflet and poster with phone numbers, Protect Marriage. Chauncey, in comment, the campaign television and print ads focused on protecting children and the concern that people of faith and religious groups would somehow be harmed by the recognition of gay marriage. The campaign conveyed a message that gay people and relationships are inferior, that homosexuality is undesirable, and that children need to be protected from exposure to gay people and their relationships. The most striking image is of the little girl who comes in and tells her mom that she learned that a princess can marry a princess, which strongly echoes the idea that mere exposure to gay people and their relationships is going to lead a generation of young people to become gay, which voters are to understand is undesirable. The campaign conveyed a message used in earlier campaigns that when gay people seek any recognition, this is an imposition on other people rather than simply an extension on gay rights to gay people. Pamphlet, Save Our Children, written by Dudley Clendenin and Adam Nagurny. Out for Good, The Struggle to Build a Gay Rights Movement in America. Chauncey, one of the earliest anti-gay initiative campaigns used overt messaging of content similar to the Proposition 8 campaign. Memorandum Protect Marriage new YouTube video classifies yes on 8 proponents' concerns. Education and protection of children is at risk. October 2008. Leaflet, Protect Marriage. Vote yes on Prop 8. Barack Obama, quote, I'm not in favor of gay marriage, close quote. News release, Protect Marriage. First graders taken to San Francisco City Hall for gay wedding. October 11, 2008. Proposition 8 campaign materials warn that unless Proposition 8 passes, children will be exposed to indoctrination on gay lifestyles. These materials invoke fears about the gay agenda.